In this video, we'll be discussing coordinate geometry pertaining to the section straight line and rectilinear figure. The question goes, the coordinates of 3 points A, B, and C are -3, 1, 6, 3, and 1, 8 respectively. Given that ABDC is a parallelogram, find in part A the coordinates of D, that's a 3 marks question, and in part B the area of the parallelogram ABDC, and that's a 2 marks question. Okay, you might want to pause this video to give this question a try, and when you're ready, keep watching. Now let us begin. First, the question is asking about the parallelograms. So it'd be good if you can have the shape of a parallelogram out like this. So this is the shape of a parallelogram like this over here on the screen. And now let's plug in the coordinates of A, which is -3, 1, which should be here, -3, 1. And B, which is 6, 3. 6, 3 is actually to the right of A and above A, so which would be here. So this is the coordinates of B. And C, which has the coordinates of 1, 8. Now for 1, 8, in this case, for 1, 8, it will be here. The reason is because it's in between A and B, and it's also above A and B as it has a y coordinate of 8. So as you look at this, the way of the sequence of how the question sequence the alphabets in this case, A, B, D has got to be here. Alright, so it will either be in a clockwise manner or an anti-clockwise manner like this. So if they say as A, B, D, C, they arrange it as A, B, D, C, and we have the coordinates out to be like this. So A, B, this must be a D then, of course. So we're going to write it in D like this, question mark, question mark. That means to say we are going to solve for our D coordinates. Also, since the question is asking for parallelogram, and in this chapter we are dealing with coordinate geometry, straight line and rectilinear figures, it will be good if you can recall the properties of a parallelogram. And that means to say that for properties of a parallelogram, the diagonals BC, alright, the diagonals BC actually bisect the diagonal AD. Alright, diagonal BC bisect the diagonal AD. So by bisect, it means to say that the midpoint of AD is the same as midpoint of BC. That is the meaning of bisect. So that means to say that we will need to have the midpoint formula. So the midpoint of line segment is given to be this, whereby you have the x1 plus x2 referring to the 2n coordinates here. So A will be in this case x1 plus x2, comma y1 plus y2. This is the midpoint of the line segments. Also, in part B, they actually ask for area of parallelograms. So by area of parallelogram, notice that none of these coordinates actually share the same x values. Especially if you look at this tree, none of these three coordinates, these three pairs of coordinates share the same x values or the same y values. So they are not on the same horizontal line or on the same vertical line. That means to say that the easiest way to find the area of this parallelogram, or a polygon in this case, is to use the area of polygon formula. So by area of polygon formula here, by area of polygons, we are referring to the shoelace methods here. So the shoelace methods will be like this. So how does the shoelace method work in this case? So let's take a look at this part here. So the shoelace method will work by having a half, and inside this operations, we are going to have the x1, y1 arranged like this in the first column, x2, y2, x3, y3, x4, y4. Notice that it goes back to the same pair of coordinates. That means to say, whichever pair of coordinates you start from, you must end with the same pair. So in this polygon, which is a 4-sided figure, you have 4 pairs of coordinates. And in this formula, you actually have 5 pairs because you start with the same one, you end with the same ones. Now, you can start with any pair of coordinates actually, but what is most important is for this shoelace method to work, it must be arranged in an anti-clockwise manner. Now, for instance, if you're going to start with C, the next pair of coordinates must be arranged in A. So this is a pair coordinates of C, and this must be coordinate of A, and this will be coordinate of B. So it must be arranged in an anti-clockwise manner for this to work, because if you do not arrange in an anti-clockwise manner, then it will give us a negative area, which is definitely not the case, because area cannot be negative. So how does this formula work? Now, let me put in some arrows which will complicate things a little bit here. So the first step to be doing this is that we will need to multiply down the pair of coordinates in this case. So for this formula to work, let me go through this. So we open our brackets half, open a bracket like this. So we're going to have x1 times y2 in this case. So by x1 times y2, I'm referring to it as a multiplying downwards like this. Multiplying downwards plus multiplying downwards x2, y3, multiply downwards. And the next one will be x3, y4 like this. Plus the next pair will be x4, y1s. Next, minus away the sum of multiplying upwards. So the sum of multiplying upwards. So by multiplying upwards, we are referring to this part here. Multiplying upwards like this. So it will be y1 x2, y2 x3, y3 x4, y4 x1s. In this case, the one represented in yellow. So let me just highlight in yellow like this. So what you're going to do is you multiply upwards, y1 x2, y2 x3, multiply upwards like this, y3 x4, multiply upwards, y4 x1s, multiply upwards like this. And of course, you close all the parentheses like this. And of course, you can then press the calculator out. Now, we only need these formulas for midpoint and area of polygon for this very short question here. Now, with this in mind, we can then start to do the question. So in part A, we are asked to find the coordinates of D. So in part A, we are asked to find the coordinates of D. So to find the coordinates of D, as we mentioned earlier, we will need to use the midpoint of line segment formula. So the coordinates of D, in this case, can be found by having the midpoint of AD equated to the midpoint of BC. So the midpoint of AD equate to the midpoint of BC because the diagonal AD actually bisect the diagonal BC. This is part of the property of parallelograms. So by midpoint of AD, applying the formula, you have the respective x's adding up and dividing by 2. So we're going to have a negative 3. We're going to have a negative 3 plus the x coordinate of D. So let me just show you the answers here. So I'm going to let the coordinate of D be P, Q. So if the coordinates of D is going to be a P, Q like this, let me just change this to P, Q. So the midpoint of AD would therefore be minus 3 plus P. Minus 3 plus P over 2, like this, applying the formula directly. And once the y coordinate of A and the y coordinate of D, you add it up. So 1 plus Q actually. So divided by 2. Set it to be the midpoint of BC, which you do the same thing against. 1 plus 6 over 2. And 8 plus 3 over 2. And of course, the next step is to really solve out for D directly, which you can press the calculator. Now notice you're going to equate this part to be this part here. The x coordinate to be the same as each other. Notice that for midpoint formula, interestingly, is that the denominator both has a 2. So there really is no point writing out separately. All you need to do is just shift the negative 3 to the right hand side. Becomes a 1 plus 6 plus 3. 1 plus 6 plus 3 is actually the tenths. So therefore, the x coordinate of D is actually tenths. You can do the same for your y coordinates. You have the same denominator of 2, you can ignore that. So 1 plus Q is actually equals to 11s. Q will therefore be 11 minus 1. So the answer for D coordinates is actually tenths. So once we get a D coordinates out, which is a 10 here. So this is going to be a tens, comma 10. So let me just change this since we got the answer out like this. So D coordinates is found to be tens, comma 10. After which we are asked to find the area of the parallelogram ABDC. To find the area of the parallelogram ABDC, we will need to use the area of polygon methods, also known as the shoelace methods over here. So let me just plug in the shoelace method here. So what happens if we decide to start with D coordinates, which is 10, 10. Now you can choose to start with any pair of coordinates, so long as you arrange it in number 1, arrange it in anti-clockwise manner. So if you start with D, the next one will be C. You cannot go on to B. Alright, start with D, you go on to C, go on to A, go on to B, and return it back to D. Arrange in an anti-clockwise manner like this. So let me just plug it into the formula like this. So once again, over here, what we have is we're going to start with D, which is writing as the first pair of coordinates 10, 10s. The next one will be anti-clockwise manner 1, 8 like this. Followed by A, which is negative 3 1s, negative 3 1 like this, and followed by B, which is a 6 3. Going back to the original coordinate of D, which is a 10 10 like this. So let's not forget that what we need to do now is to put in the arrows like this. So we need to multiply downwards first before we can do out the whole thing. So let's multiply downwards first. So 10 times 8 in this case. 10 times 8. And this is 1 times 1s. Plus minus 3 times 3. Plus 6 times 10. And what we're going to do now is to minus away upwards. Minus the sum of multiplying outwards in this case. So we multiply outwards. 10 times 1s will be here. 10 times 1s. 8 times a minus 3. 8 times minus 3 like this. Followed by 1 times a 6. And you also have a 3 times a 10s. Alright, once you have this, you close every single parenthesis you have inside the statements, and you can then press the calculator out. So when you press the calculator out, this will be the answer. So when you press the calculator out, please be careful for this because there is a very high tendency of making mistake because of the number of parentheses involved. Okay, so that's the answer for this question. Part B. It's a 55 unit square. So let me just complete the question by writing the statement like this. So the area of the parallelogram in this case of ABDC is actually 55 units square. And so that's the answer for this question. I hope you like this video. Thank you for watching and see you in the next episodes.